If you can answer 4 questions, then you've understood a book well. Reading takes a lot of theory, takes a lot of lessons, takes a lot of learning opportunities and setbacks and frustrations. But after practice, if you can successfully ask and answer just 4 questions, then you have understood the book well and you've been directed on that first step towards better reading. Asking the right questions is the core of reading for understanding. It's the core of active reading. It's the core of dialogue with the author and trying to see what he has to offer us and how we can learn from him. And if we can master that skill of not only asking questions but asking the right questions at the right time, then we've really mastered reading, or at least set ourselves on the path to mastery, and it will all become effortless with enough practice. The first question is, what is the book about? Because you wouldn't read poetry the same way you read a novel, or the same way you read a scientific treatise. You need to first understand what the book is actually about and what type of book it is, so that you can adjust your approach and alter it according to what you're reading. Because to understand how to approach it, you need to know first what the author's goals are, what his purpose in writing the book is. The context helps as well, especially in philosophy and history, because you have to know in what picture the author is writing his book, the overall context of the history he's in and what the climate of the discussion is like. And you have to know these things in order to keep it aware in your mind and then approach that book with a better insight, so you can interpret his words in a better light, essentially. From a top-down perspective, that means looking at the whole. What is the unity of the book? What is the book about entirely? What's the leading theme? How can you summarize the book in just a single sentence? Because that will let you see the bigger picture. And of course, within that, we have the chapters. That's how the author divides the book, and usually a good author will divide it in such a way that makes it easier for us to read, or more engaging in the case of a novel, and has clear separations of what we can expect in each one. And parts of us as readers, before we even jump into the book, is we should know really what each chapter is about. What is each chapter focused on? What is each chapter summarizing? And how does each chapter link to the other to be part of the whole? How does it unite itself? Now, the second question addresses the substance of the book, the real meat of it. And it's, what is the book about? What is actually being said in this book? What are the arguments used? What are the assumptions or the propositions that the author states? And in the case of fiction, it's, what is the narrative? Like, what happens? What do the characters do? Where is it set? What is the overarching theme or topic being discussed? And that's really probably the biggest, most time-consuming question to answer, because you have to keep asking it throughout the whole book. Unlike the first, we sort of know that before we read. But this one, we have to constantly ask and interrogate and really engage with the author's words to answer it. What is the book about? Now, the third question is a little different, because our approach changes drastically depending on the book. But the third question is, what is the extent of the truth? How true is the author being in this? Is it correct? Is he misleading? Is he uninformed? Is he missing something out? Is he failing to see it from this important perspective that you can think about? As readers, we have to be critical and analyze the extent of the truth, especially in the case of a treatise where the author is arguing a point and using sub-arguments to back it up, and he's making lots of propositions, certain assumptions we have to either assume with him for the moment, or some things we can spot that are inconsistent or ambiguous, for example. But as readers, we need to be able to spot them and judge critically whether it's true or not. And of course, in the case of fiction, novels, we can really think, to what extent is it true based on the world building? Like, is it a convincing story of themes we can relate to and characters we can relate to? Because I'm not a big fiction reader myself, but I know that some fiction, you struggle to get immersed in it because it feels almost artificial. The author's not good at letting you bond to the characters and building a strong world that is really convincing for you. And I suppose that's how you would answer it. How true is it if it's fiction? I should add also that to be able to answer the question of to what extent is the book true, then you must first have understood the first two questions. Because we can only criticize something once we've understood it properly and once we know what the book is saying. Because if we fail to grasp the substance of the book, then how can we then say what's wrong with it? Because we haven't understood it in the first place. For example, if you're debating someone about something and they misrepresent your point, then they can't criticize you because they've misrepresented you. So what you're saying is not what they're thinking you're saying. It's the straw man argument, essentially. And it's the same logic with books. We can't apply straw man arguments and then argue against them if that's not what the author was saying in the first place. And I know it's tricky. It's tricky to always read the author as exactly as he wanted to say it. But that's part of good reading. It's part of being a good reader who can catch the ball the author throws properly and interpret it in the light he wished to, as best you can. Of course, it's also the author's job to write well, but we as readers must be critical and aware of what the author is saying before we can even criticize it. The fourth and final question is, how is what we read relevant to us? What do we do with it? What's the significance of the information we learn? Because when we read practical books, for example, let's say a cookbook or a personal finance book that offers you advice on how to manage your money, it's clear. We read it, and should we be convinced by the author's motivations to get money and protect your finances, then we can agree with that. And the natural step on from there is applying what the author says. Because especially in the productivity sphere and the self-improvement sphere, there's a tendency to read practical books and then not apply them at all. The very act of reading them is enough to convince you you've done enough. You think you're applying them and you think you're getting better, but you're not. And of course, learning is never bad, even if we don't apply it straight away. But if we don't actually take what the book is saying and implement it in our own life, then it's sort of wasted. It's up to us to finish what the book started. And in the case of practical books, there's very clear cut. But then if you want to ask, what is the significance of something that is not overtly practical, like a science book or something about, say, philosophy, where there's no clear and explicit necessarily, there's no clear explicit thing to do, to carry out. And in that case, we have to ask, okay, well, this is still relevant because it must fit into my knowledge in some other way. How does it fit into what I know? How does it contradict with what I previously believed? Is there anything I can build upon what I already knew based on this new knowledge? And that's really the relevance, because it's theoretical. And as we learn new things, we keep asking those questions, forming links, building upon what we know. And that's the significance. And in some cases, yes, it's, say in ethics, the practical implication is clear. We can be convinced that we have to behave a certain way and then go out and apply that in our life, whether it's explicitly stated in the text of how to achieve that, or you sort of have to infer it yourself, which you'll find that you have to do a lot. You find that you have to read behind the lines and think, well, okay, now how can I take this theory and then use it in action? And it's almost one and the same sometimes. So that's the fourth and final question. How do we take what we learn and apply it? When I first read about the art of asking questions for active reading, I was left worried. I was reading it excited to be able to start a new trajectory of learning. It was exciting because it was new. But there was also that deep sort of fear in me. It's like, okay, I've learned this, but how in the hell am I going to be able to apply this? How am I ever going to remember all these questions and remember to ask them actively? And it was just overwhelming. It's like, how does anyone do this? But after some reflection, it's easier than that in the bigger picture. Because yes, of course, if we don't already do that, and if we have bad reading habits, let's say, or habits we deem not effective towards helping us increase our understanding, then it can be hard at first to first shed old habits and then reintegrate new ones in your life. Because the art of asking questions is a habit and a skill that we must practice over time. And at first it will be difficult, it will be strange, we'll forget to do it, we'll be frustrated that we didn't. And slowly we have to actively exert our minds to ask the right questions. And that takes effort and it's frustrating. But slowly, once you keep doing that and you keep building it as a habit, you learn to do it almost subconsciously, seamlessly. What used to be active mental effort for you, or I must remember I'm interrogating the book for this argument, or I must spot the significance of it. Before, as a beginner, that used to be active, but now, after practice, it's almost subconscious. It's seamless. The experience is automatic. Of course, you still have to process what you're reading, but the prompt to ask the question comes naturally. And that's why I want you to remember when you set off with these new 4 questions that you must answer. One thing I love to do, especially when I was beginning to use these techniques in my reading, was I would like to print sort of a cheat sheet and then put it up on the wall next to me, or have it next to me as I read, maybe as a bookmark. I would just fold it. And then I would use that as almost a prompt to always remind and encourage me to ask the right questions while I read. And as a beginner, obviously you forget to do that sometimes, and it can help having it there so that you can always refer back to it and just be reminded what you should be doing to increase your understanding. And after hammering it in your head, it just becomes part of your reading habits. So in the description of this video, I've made a sort of cheat sheet describing the questions of this video and maybe elaborating on them slightly. And I hope that you can print it out or just have it on your computer or something. And you can do exactly that. Keep it next to you while you read so that you can begin to integrate something new into your reading life, a new habit that helps you get more out of what you read. Because that's ultimately the goal. That's the goal of this. And asking the right questions is the core of that. So check the description, download it, print it, do whatever, put it on your wall, and just have it next to you while you read. It's a good companion. And you'll notice as you progress, you will eventually not need it. There will become a point where you're just, okay, this is part of who I am now. I can read amazing. And I don't need this prompt anymore. But of course, as beginners, it could help to have that. So do check that out.